All right. We're in the green room. Welcome. Happy Friday. So Vala, this is going to be fun. We should probably do some quick intros. So, but Vala, say hi.
Yeah, hi everyone. Vala Afshar dialing in from Boston, episode 188, 564 interviews, and we have guests, unique guests, 405, 406, and 407. So thanks everyone.
Yeah, no, hey everyone, here live in Silicon Valley, Cupertino, saying hi to everyone. And let's do some quick introductions. Aubrey, say hi. We'll go to Jason, we'll go to David, and we'll go to Rana.
Hi, calling in from the middle of nowhere in the mountains of California.
Okay,
Jason Korman, Miami, Florida.
Oh, awesome. Awesome.
Great.
David Bray, coming from an undisclosed location somewhere outside of Washington, D.C.
A sushi restaurant, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I've got sashimi on my mind right now.
Rana, where are you calling in from?
Hi, everybody. I'm Rana el Kaliouby, and I'm calling in just outside of Boston.
Oh, this
Very cool.
Well, hope
We're
everyone's
not
doing
competing
well.
on weather here. Vala and I have the best weather. Yeah.
Wow, what's going on over in Boston?
Yeah, rainy and cold. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it is? Okay, I thought you had really good weather. I was like, oh, this is awesome.
I mean, it's slightly cooler than what we have in D.C., but right now very wet and although it's green. Hopefully it's green where you all are.
Absolutely.
It's beautiful here.
I'm not going to say anything. I'm in California, and it's comfy. I'll leave it at that. So, but it's great. You know, hey, look, a lot of us have been sheltering in place. We've been in the middle of this has just been chaotic. You know, this is our Friday to have something fun, and so we're going to start the show in a few seconds, and we'll do a countdown. We're going to jump in. Everyone, welcome to the green room. We're having a little fun in the back, and we will begin. So, Aubrey, countdown.
All right, 3, 2, and 1. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Welcome and thank you for joining us on DisrupTV. My name is Vala Afshar. I'm the Chief Digital Evangelist at Salesforce and your co-host for the next hour. We welcome you to follow us on Twitter at DisrupTV Show. Send Ray, myself, and our distinguished guests your questions live using hashtag DisrupTV, and we'll do our best to answer them. It's my pleasure to introduce my co-host. He's the founder and CEO of Constellation Research. He's the best-selling author of Disrupting Digital Business. I love promoting his book every week. He's one of the top futurists to follow on Twitter at RWANG0. Welcome, Ray Wong, to DisrupTV.
Hey, thanks a lot. Happy Friday, everyone. I'm here with my awesome co-host, Vala Afshar. He's one of the top followers on Twitter for CIOs, CMOs, CEOs, and endless points of wisdom on life. So if you catch his Twitter, you'll be super happy, super excited, and of course, inspired, especially in times like this. So we've got awesome guests every week. Who do we kick off with this?
You know, Ray, we've got some of the best and brightest CEOs and thought leaders that come on DisrupTV, and today's no exception. Our first guest is Dr. Rana el Kaliouby, CEO and co-founder of Effectiva and author of Girl Decoded. We're going to learn about the incredible new book. Rana is a pioneer in artificial intelligence, emotional AI, as well as co-founder and CEO of Effectiva, an acclaimed AI startup that was spun from MIT Media Labs. After earning her doctorate degree from Cambridge University, Rana joined MIT Media Labs as a research scientist, where she spearheaded the application of emotion recognition technology in a variety of fields, including mental health and autism. Rana's company, Effectiva, now works with more than a quarter of the companies in the Fortune Global 500. She's also the author of Girl Decoded, a scientist's quest to reclaim our humanity by bringing emotional intelligence to technology. Wow. Wow. Rana is an unbelievable TED Talk speaker, Aspen Idea speaker. She's been profiled in the New Yorker. She was on the Forbes list of America's top 50 women in tech. She made Fortune magazine's list of 40 under 40. In 2019, she appeared in a YouTube original series, Age of AI, hosted by the real Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr. So, by the way, we only have a 20-minute show, and I had to cut your bio down to a minute. Sorry. You can follow Dr. Kaliouby on Twitter at KALIOUBY. Welcome, Rana, to DisrupTV.
Thank you for having me. I'm a huge fan of you, Vala, and I follow you religiously on Twitter. And sometimes I'm like, is he a chatbot? Like, are these for real? They are. You're here.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
It's the one and only. And on your end as well, I've been watching that TED Talk with lots of interest. I think it's been amazing. But I think more interesting is really you were set off on a personal mission. And this personal mission, I mean, you've seen it in your career, you've seen it in the startups that you're working on, you've seen it in the talks. It's about humanizing technology. But growing up where you were growing up back in the time, you know, that might have seen a big stretch for not only you and society and around you. So tell us a little bit about that story.
So I'm originally from Egypt. I grew up in Cairo and the Middle East. My parents are technologists, so funny story there. My dad taught COBOL programming in the 70s, the computer programming
He's in
language.
demand right now.
I know, it's back. And my mom decided, this was before they met, and she decided to learn about programming, and so she signed up for this programming class, met my dad, and and they've both been in technology their entire careers. So they had a little bit of influence on my choice of studying computer science. But I've just always been fascinated by how technology brings people together and changes the way we connect and communicate with one another. That's been a driving force throughout my entire career. And shortly after kind of majoring in computer science in Egypt, I started a PhD at Cambridge University. And that was my first kind of living away from home experience. And I get there and I realize I was spending more time with my device. This was back in 2000, so before we even had smartphones, but still I was.
Oh, I think we might have a drop there.
It was the main portal of communication with my family back home. And, like the times we're in today, all of the richness of face-to-face conversations just didn't,
So, yep. So I think we have a little drop there. And Rana, if you come back, it's we'll get to that point of the question. So,
Okay.
I think we lost you for a little bit, but you're talking about getting back to that humanizing piece, right? The richness of interactions and experience. So,
give me 1 second.
Sure.
Give me 1 second. I will switch networks.
While you're doing that, don't worry about that. She's switching networks.
Yeah.
Vala, one of the interesting things about that TED Talk was really just feeling the inspiration. Right. And Rana, I think that's the thing that, we really got from that. I mean, I was like, people are like, hey, we need to get her to come speak at our conference. I'm like, yeah, if we have the conference in live, yes, we're definitely going to think about that. Right. And it's definitely that power behind that conversation. So let's talk more about that. Right. I mean, this new notion of emotional intelligence and the technology, we interact every day. I mean, sometimes I feel like we're being trained to react on emotion and not logic. Like everything's incentivized for gamification and endorphins. Let's get the most endorphins in you, like in the next 30 seconds. So.
Yeah, I mean, can you hear me fine? I switched to
Yes.
so I think we should be okay. When you look at human intelligence, your IQ or your cognitive intelligence is of course super important, but your emotional intelligence, like how can you read other people's nonverbal communications and tap into that and adapt your behaviors? Like people who have higher EQs are better managers, they're better leaders, they're more persuasive, they're more likable. And I just believe that this is true for technology as well, especially technology that interfaces with us on a kind of a continuous basis, on an everyday basis, like your Amazon Alexa or your device, your phone or your car. And so these devices don't just need IQ, which is what most people focus on in the AI space. They need EQ as well. They need to have empathy. They need to learn human. They need to understand how humans behave. And so that's kind of, we're trying to build computers that can understand your facial expressions, your hand gestures, your vocal intonations, and interact with us just the way we would.
Absolutely. I'm also from the Middle East, immigrated to the U.S. Abruptly. The importance of IQ and EQ, especially when you go through what I would argue the most disruptive thing that could happen to a person, whether you leave your birth country by choice or you're forced, really opens up your eye to the importance of emotions, and what better time than now, where there's such a need for empathy and forgiveness and inclusivity. So what were some of the challenging decisions you had to make in terms of your research and your career? Because you're a pioneer. I mean, you're working in the field of AI as a scientist way ahead of most of us. So what were some of the challenges in terms of identifying the path you wanted to, and your research thesis?
A number of things. Even just thinking back to when I was a fresh grad.
Yeah, and we're losing a little bit of the signal here. Let's see if we get back. See if we can see what's.
Yeah, maybe on our end.
So it could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. But everyone's on the internet. Everyone's sheltering from home. And,
yeah. Right.
I mean,
Right.
Yeah. So it's very unusual to kind of. My husband at the time, he had to stay because he was running a startup, and so I just basically left and
alone. Wow.
Alone and started the PhD. So that was kind of a defining moment. Later on, after I finished my PhD at Cambridge, I had the opportunity to join MIT Media Lab as a postdoc and research scientist. And again, I commuted between Boston and Cairo, which was really tough for all sorts of reasons. But back to what Ray was saying, once you have a conviction and a passion about something, it just trumps everything else, right? And I find that it continues to be the driving force behind my actions. I just fundamentally believe we need this technology, and it's going to improve our lives in multiple ways, and I want to see it out there.
What is interesting too is the study of what you're talking about, emotion, right? And the science of emotion. Does it make you more introspective, like looking at yourself as you're studying everyone else? And does that change the way you think about human interaction?
Yeah, so the book is called Girl Decoded for a reason. As I was starting to write the book, I realized that in this whole journey of teaching computers to read emotions, I had to decode my own emotions. I come from a very kind of hardworking family, no nonsense. You don't whine about things. And so growing up, I didn't really talk about my emotions much. And I didn't really acknowledge my emotions to my own self even. But just over the past few years, especially as I kind of started the company and stepped into the CEO role, I started to really share my emotions more broadly. And I feel like there's a lot of power in doing that. There's a lot of power in, leading with empathy and being vulnerable. And so, I've learned a lot about myself in this process of teaching machines about emotions.
That's very cool. I hope you don't have siblings, because how do they compete with a pioneer in the most important technology of the 21st century, a CEO, a sure to be best-selling author? That's a dinner at your household. But you don't know COBOL, I bet. So Dad still has
exactly. I have two younger sisters, and they are also super rock stars. So
awesome.
It's pretty cool. Yeah.
That's awesome. So tell us about, how do you build emotion into technology? Ray and I are technologists, and this is a super fascinating, super important, because as we talk about ethical use of technology, which I think will challenge all businesses that are involved in leveraging machine learning and neural networks, deep learning, and all these advanced natural language processing, all these technologies that are supposed to co-create value at the speed of need in a highly personalized, highly relevant way. Emotions play an incredible role in all of that. So how do you do it? I think we may be stuck.
Yeah, we're stuck a little bit. Let's see. The refresh should come in. Yep, we're in on the refresh. So good.
If you think about how people communicate emotions and their mental states in general, only 10% is in the choice of words we're using. 90% or more is nonverbal. And it's split kind of equally between your facial expressions, like your smile or frown or smirk, and your hand and face gestures, and then your vocal intonations. And so what we do is we try to capture these signals by using deep learning, computer vision, machine learning, speech recognition. And we essentially, like, for example, if you wanted to train an algorithm that can detect a smile versus a smirk, they both involve the lower half of the face, but they have very different meanings. We kind of feed the algorithm hundreds of thousands of examples of people smiling, hundreds of thousands of examples of people smirking, and the machine learns the difference between the two. And we just keep adding more and more data to increase the repertoire of the system. So right now we're up to about 25 different expressions and emotional and cognitive states. There's still a lot of work to do. Yeah.
That's amazing. Ray, I think about it, the role of CHROs finding more effective ways of recruiting talent and being able to assess, emotional intelligence with the candidates to ensure cultural fit and willingness to work. I know you apply team ability exercise. I also think about sales professionals. I've never met a sales professional that has closed a significant deal purely digital. So the ability to engage with your customers and prospects and be able to assess their likelihood to be more interested and engaged in the products and services that you offer, how incredibly important to assess the selling motion and the emotions involved when we're in a purely distributed digital world that we're in. I think your technology is going to be so incredibly important for different lines of business, marketing, sales, customer service, and support. Oh, I mean, I lived in that space for 10 years. So being able to understand the emotions of my clients as we engage, I mean, it's an infinite amount of applicability in my mind. So congratulations. I think it's incredible. Ray, sorry, that was just, I'm excited about the technology.
No, we're on cutting edge stuff, right? And, and some of the things.
Yeah.
Please.
I think I'm back.
You are back.
So I'm going to assume I am. Vala, what you said totally resonates with me. I especially now in the times when, where we are working virtually, where, my kids are learning online, we have this need to be able to quantify what's working and what's not, right? As a CEO, I want to be able to build loyalty and trust and empathy and motivate my team. And it's so hard to do that virtually. But imagine if we were able to capture all of that information and give, the business leader or the salesperson some feedback. When you did this, it worked really well. Like we could see that they perked, they leaned in and they perked up. Or you went on and on and on and on for 20 minutes and people were rolling their eyes. They're not buying, right? Like that would be so powerful data.
Yeah. Hugely powerful. And by the way, I have never met a sales professional that was able to, complete a substantial sale without physically meeting the person.
Right.
Those cues we pick up at a networking event, breaking bread at dinner, just being able to read the room in person. And now we're forced to do this in a distributed digital model. So I think that the relevance of what you and your company is doing is significantly more in this new post-pandemic. And I know, Ray, you wrote the post-pandemic playbook. I can just imagine being able to read the room in the digital, channel is incredible. It's incredible.
It's the texture. You lose that feeling, and and part of that too is, as we're trying to do this in technology, one of the questions that you answer is really, how do you build empathy into technology? I mean, it sounds really, technology is bytes and bits and ones and zeros, and like, how do you ensure that there's some level of empathy, Rana?
Yeah, let's picture this. We've all used some kind of conversational interface. Think of Amazon Alexa, right? You ask Alexa to play a song or order something for you. She doesn't get it right. So you ask it again, and then she gets it wrong again. Now you're increasingly becoming frustrated and annoyed with it. But Alexa's completely oblivious to that. Well, what instead, imagine if instead it had some level of emotional intelligence. And so it could detect that, you're getting annoyed here. And it could empathize. It could take a step back and say, I'm sorry. It sounds like I'm not getting this right. Let me try again. Let me try something different. That would quickly move these conversational interfaces from being very transactional. You ask it to do something, it just does it, end of the conversation, to becoming more conversational truly and getting to know you. And once it gets to know you, it can persuade you to do things. It can persuade you to be more productive or eat healthier or, move more, which we all need to do. I definitely do. So
absolutely. My final question is, can you share an aha moment with Girl Decoded? As you're going through the journey of capturing your experiences, lessons, failures, meaningful connections, and you're a trailblazer. Again, you're a CEO. The pedigree from Cambridge University to Media Labs. You're surrounded by arguably the smartest people in the world. So in terms of reflection and some of the aha moments as you wrote the book, can you share, a few of those with us?
Yeah, I think my biggest just takeaway having written the book is the number of times I've had inner doubts. And, I share this one particular story, one particular story in the book where when we started Affectiva, my co-founder Ross Picard and I hired a seasoned business executive to run the company. And then when he left, the question became, I don't know if people can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you. You're good.
I'll wait a few seconds.
Yep.
I could hear Rana.
Oh, we just lost her. She's refreshing back in. So, but this has been one of those interesting things. A great story in terms of what's going on for those that follow. We'll see if she pops back in. But you can get Girl Decoded. That's the book. A scientist's quest to reclaim our humanity by bringing emotional intelligence to technology. Definitely an awesome book to read. And, definitely someone that, we would definitely want to have at CCE. We'll see if she comes in. Oh, you're back. She's back. We're singing your praises. So, yeah. But we got a quick question for you. It's coming from the chat. It's our friend Matthew Halliday. Are facial expressions changing over time to display emotion? For example, are you getting too much Botox? So everyone's smiling like that. Do you find new data sets are varying over time, like the way language changes? Now we can have facial expressions change over time.
I love that question. I don't get that question often, but it's spot on. Facial expressions are dynamic. You can't just tell the emotion from just one static picture. You need to see how it unfolds over time. It's a time series kind of data, and we look at how the face changes from one frame to the next. That's a really critical part of it.
Would you apply a reinforcement learning? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And also like recurrent neural networks, not just convolutional neural nets, so that we can consider the time.
Exactly, because you get the time elapse and then all the
awesome.
All right, as we geek out on AI algorithms, we're with Rana el Kaliouby, PhD, CEO, and co-founder at Affectiva, and author of the book Girl Decoded, published by Penguin Random House. Definitely check that out. You can get the book, check it out, and of course, we'll get some of your questions in there. So, Rana, thank you. We'll send you a note afterwards. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, everybody.
Thank you so much. You're terrific. Please follow Rana on Twitter. Brilliant. She's working on truly leading edge technology. Our next guest, we welcome Jason Korman, CEO of Gapingvoid. Jason is the co-founder, CEO of Gapingvoid, a serial entrepreneur. Jason's early career was spent in the wine business. So at age 24, he created La Crema Winery, which was 200 acres of vineyard and 3 different facilities throughout Northern California. He then later went on to create Stormhook, a South African winery that became an early case study on how to use social media to create a global brand. His viral campaigns cleared out shelves of over 2,000 stores in the UK wine retailer in a weekend, which led Stormhook to win an Ad Age 50 award. Gapingvoid, Jason's current company, has always been about seeing the world through a unique lens that connects seemingly unrelated ideas to provide insights and to make life and business a little bit more human. Talk about emotional AI and making business human. I love this. The core concepts forming Jason's work is belief that business and products connect with people in complex emotional ways. Technology has always changed how we work, and there is ongoing realignment of where we work and life intersect. You can follow Jason's company on Twitter at GAPINGVOID. Welcome, Jason, to DisrupTV.
Thanks, Vala. Great to be here. Ray, a huge fan. Love the show. So it's really a pleasure to be on. And I want to echo Rana's admiration of your Twitter feed, Vala. I don't know how you do it. Clearly, it's your main job because it is perfectly orchestrated, and it's a mystery as to how you actually were able to pull that off.
I have some emotional AI robots that assist with my. No, I'm kidding.
We're going to call Rana on that. How to actually get our emotional get the emotion back. And
I appreciate that.
Hey, no, thank you for being on the show. I mean, we've been big fans of you for a long time and your company. You know, you guys are best known for those fun cartoons that just capture the moment, and you're like, oh yeah, that's so cool, right? And it's really about that clear and focused approach. Talk about your mission to make work more meaningful and help people love what they do, because you clearly love what you do.
So over the years, we've been doing this for a dozen years now, and over the years we have really turned the organization, and we're a small company, but we have a focus on culture design and this idea that organizational cultures can and should be deliberately designed. And it all started as an accident, right? It started back actually before Gapingvoid Culture Design was created in 2005, when we became friendly. I was based in London with my co-founder Hugh McLeod, who's the chief creative and the guy responsible for all those really interesting drawings. And we became acquainted with a bunch of folks from Microsoft, most notably a guy named Steve Clayton, who was a marketing guy in London at the time. And we spent a bunch of time with them. We saw that then you got to remember Microsoft 2005, 2006. It was a time when Microsoft was not, say, the beloved organization that it is today, right? They were the evil empire. It was before, the other evil empires really were big enough to
compete on evil empireship.
Exactly. And there was this thing we identified within the folks we met, which is that they all joined Microsoft to have this huge impact on the world, the scale, the opportunity. Vala, is probably a lot of the way you feel about Salesforce and being part of a big organization. But, they felt that the market, kind of hated them, didn't give them the opportunities they wanted. And so Hugh created this image, which was this blue monster, right? We became known as, and it just said Microsoft changed the world to go home. And you can go search for it now online. And there's still dozens and dozens and dozens of articles and white papers. And it was the study about how this image and the simple idea actually became an internal meme within Microsoft and really changed how people looked at their work. And during that time, I looked at that and I went, this is interesting, right? Like really interesting. How is it possible that a simple idea attached to an illustration can have that much power, right? And what I realized was that it was really a study in a new way of executing change management. That's what it is. And so over time, what we've done, and this is kind of interesting, and it's been a lot of trial and error, and we've been really fortunate to be supported early on by people like Tony Shea at Zappos and Graham Weston at Rackspace and all sorts of like really bright culture-centric CEOs.
They all jumped in.
And they let us, they paid us to learn, basically, is what they did. And what we saw over time was that we could reverse engineer what happened at Microsoft and create frameworks that were data-driven with very specific outcomes that solve all sorts of really hard, data-driven, or I say employee experience problems, right? Culture. So it doesn't really matter what you're thinking about in terms of digital transformation, patient experience in healthcare, innovation in the Air Force. We're redesigning the culture for the Global Strike Command at the moment, which are the guys that handle 75% of the nuclear mission, right? So it doesn't really matter what the human-centered problem is. We can identify the emotional connection to the outcomes. Like I really, really loved Rana's, what Rana talked about, because it tracks directly to what we do, meaning in business, the discussion these days, it's all data driven. But the reality of it is, when it comes to humans, it's not data driven at all. It's actually about emotion. It's about connecting people to emotion. It's about understanding the emotions that will drive the organizational outcomes you want to have, how you standardize and implement that and execute it in a way where you can make culture a management system that is effective for leadership, but also dramatically impacts people's work experience and gets them really connected to the vision, the outcomes, and the operational aspects of the work that need to happen. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but it started with sort of crazy drawings and Microsoft as an accident, but then it's evolved into a complete system of execution around building and executing culture at scale, right? Mostly for big organizations. So,
Jason, we've had Paul Doherty, who's the Chief Technology Innovation Officer at Accenture, who wrote the book I have back here, Human Plus Machine.
Sure.
And gave a number of examples in his book. I mean, he's a technologist leading a 505,000 person company.
Sure.
And in the book, lots of references by industry, by geography of more algorithms and machines as part of the work environment. And we've referenced folks like Dr. Kai-Fu Lee, who talks about the future of work, which is, again, humans and machines coexist. Is it more difficult, or what are the challenges of creating a meaningful work experience and helping people love what they do, where as we look at the unprecedented velocity of innovation, speed and direction, and the fact that they are heterogeneous environments of people and machines working together, whether it's at Amazon or Alibaba or wherever, these are some of the companies that are obviously doing amazing work with this environment. What are some of the challenges that you face creating that culture DNA when you have more automation and machines as part of the ecosystem?
So that's a really interesting question. I think the there's some fundamentals that we cannot forget when it comes to people, right? And those basics are really that well, and regardless, it doesn't matter whether there's a machine person interface or work is made to be more productive through any sort of technology, but we always have to remember the human fundamentals, which is that we all want to be part of something larger, right? We all want to feel connection at work, and I think one of the challenges that a lot of large organizations had is this idea of connection and valuing connection for people. And the companies that are super successful tend to do that better than the folks who aren't. But in addition to wanting to be part of something larger, we want to grow and develop in what we do every day. And that tracks directly back to Maslow's theories. They're immutable. It is fundamentally human nature for most of us, right? And there are exceptions, but for almost all of us, we want to grow and develop and feel that we are capable of self-actualizing in the things that we do every day, that we're succeeding, right? We also want to have, and again, it's a huge challenge in big organizations, we want to feel that we have some control over our future. Right. There's this concept of self-determination theory. We want to feel like we actually are in control of our lives. And sometimes it's an illusion. Like, to be honest, that's who predicted COVID, right? There's things that happen, but we want to feel that we can influence, our surroundings and our work environment and what have you. And what we see in big organizations, especially in sales, for companies that want to remain focused on sales, the further you get away from the customer, the less control you have over a lot of interactions, right? And a lot of people, like if you're working in big pharma and you're a statistician, you are showing up, and working on stuff all day long, and it's possible you can work for a very, very, very long period of time without ever seeing the fruits of your labor, right? I'm having light problems here.
Everything you're talking about is like, hey,
productivity is good, but the lights are going out. I don't know.
God has called and said, we agree.
There's some affirmation going on behind you. So, I was trying to see if it was Morse code. Like, am I supposed to pick up on?
I don't know what the deal is, but anyway. So the other part, the last thing I'll say, and there's a list of other things, but the important things are that we want to feel that we're doing meaningful work that matters, right? So when we spend time in especially in large organizations, right, one of the huge challenges that people feel like they're doing work for work's sake. They're showing up at meetings that lead nowhere. They're returning emails that there's just a huge burden. The quality of work and work experience declines because we don't feel like we're having real impact. Right. And mattering, it feels inconsequential on one level, but on another level, it is the thrust behind. When you see super successful startups, whoever's leading that has managed to actually bottle up this sense of mattering and meaning and purpose and connection and being part of something larger and a mission that matters. And that's their currency in many ways, and the guys, and women who are really famous, as entrepreneurs, they don't become that way because of luck. and they don't necessarily become that way because they're smarter than everybody else. A lot of it has to do with these emotional things that they understand about people and human nature and how they work and what matters and how you create culture that really impacts people within and without, right? So and I'll just to make a point about that, final point, is that when you look at companies like Zappos, right, and you strip away culture, it's a very mundane business. Full price retail, a call center, right? It's not a very exciting business. When you overlay culture, is what provides the meaning and the purpose and makes them an irresistible place to do business as a customer and to want to work at. And so when we think about the rich possibilities to add value through aligning people around culture, cultural norms, I think the question of technology is a bit of a red herring because you've got to deal with the fundamentals of what people need and want, right? And if you get that covered, then people can deal with the other stuff, right? So I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it makes a ton of sense, right? It's really understanding what draws people, what gets that sense of urgency, what gets people, lit up, and that excitement, And one of the things you did is you actually studied this, right? You have a CEO culture study, and if I remember properly, you talked about culture as a management system, which is pretty big.
Yeah. So that study, which we released earlier this year, is. It was based upon, well, first a study that our friend Len Schlesinger, who's a fellow he's a professor, Baker Scholar at Harvard now at HBS. He had been the president of Babson College. He had been the joint chairman and COO of the Limited. He had been at Yale before that and Harvard, like a very accomplished guy. He's a organizational psychologist, and he is the dog. Sorry.
I love that. I have two big dogs, and they bark at almost every meeting I have. So
after getting out, I was thinking, I hope the dog doesn't bark, right? But whatever. So Len did a study a few years ago, which basically, and he did a bunch of studies, but this one in particular really identified the fact that companies that do great at culture-centric, really outperform their competitive set. And this is the usual set of suspects, right? It was Four Seasons and Ritz-Carlton and Nordstrom's and all the companies we know really well, right? So he identified this economic sort of benefit that companies have. And we thought, okay, that's an interesting place to start. And I thought about the people we knew, right? People like Tony Hsieh, people like Graham Weston, people that we didn't know but observed, like Herb Keller at Southwest. Yeah. More recently, even Satya Nadella, especially Satya Nadella at Microsoft, the biggest culture change benefit ever created, right, in the history of business. But we thought, okay, there's more to it than just financial returns. And what we did in the study is we linked up a bunch of data which really showed the following. And sorry, just to add one more thing. And what we wanted to do was disimbue people of the notion that culture is only about employee engagement, right? Because that's the trope on it. It's like, oh yeah, more engaged employees. Well, we get more out of our people. And we thought, no, we know that's part of it, but it's part of a much bigger discussion. So what we saw was that, and this was CEO directed. So for CEOs who invest in culture, that's personally time and effort and really economically in their businesses, what they get first is employees as fans. All right. Mm-hmm. And you can there's available Glassdoor data, which is very clear, about this. All right. Anybody can find it. So employees as fans. And then what we saw, and Vala, you're very familiar with this, and Ray too, as for you as well, that when you have employees who are highly engaged, who love their work, who love their company, right, you wind up with customers who adore doing business with them. Right. Why? Because customer experience is a direct outcome of employee experience.
Absolutely.
Right?
100%.
Okay. So here was the weird twist, though. What we discovered was that it just so happens that the media loves the same companies that customers love and employees love, right? Now, okay. And I guess the most stark example of this is if you think about the media coverage of Microsoft pre-Satya and post-Satya, right? I mean, there was not a lot good said about Steve Ballmer. Let's just be honest. I mean, Steve's this totally nice guy, successful, like amazing, and great leader, but media hated him, right? Satya, oh, okay, culture, employees love him, customers now going to go, you're okay now, right? Oh, the media loves him, right? And we see the economic impact of that, which is that it raises margins. And it raises margins for a lot of complex reasons, but fundamentally at its core, we talk about emotions, is that people are less price sensitive doing business with companies they love. Look at the pricing, well, not this month, but until a few months ago, look at the pricing on Southwest Airways. It used to be the low price leader, not anymore, right? It is very much, all about, maximizing revenue now. So obviously margins then turn into operating revenues, best in class operating revenues. And then we saw something else. And this becomes obvious once I say it, which is that those companies have superb innovation, right? And the superb innovation, is really about the fact that people feel able to innovate in environments where they feel psychologically safe, where they feel that they're successful, where they feel the company's got momentum, where companies are able to invest in innovation, and it carries through. And that carries through for public companies to amazing share performance, greater personal income as a percentage of revenue for the CEO themselves, but also ultimately more influence for the organization and the individual running it. And that in turn attracts better people, and there's a flywheel effect. And the flywheel effect just goes on and on and on, and we see it, and we see when it breaks too. So, anyway, so that's what the study. That's the short version of the
Great study. Great study.
But
Incredible. My final question to you, Jason. What do CEOs need to do now? In that, short of millions of tests per day or tracing capabilities, and ultimately maybe a vaccine. We're going to be in this new norm where we're going to be in a more distributed, more digital environment, even as businesses start to open back up in limited capacity throughout the country and the world. So, what is your advice to CEOs who really need to ensure that there's meaningful work and commitment for all stakeholders, business partners, customers, and certainly employees, in order to stay relevant in this highly competitive, highly disruptive world that we're going to be a part of, at least in this calendar year?
So, of course, I don't claim to have all the answers. I thought Rana's discussion earlier about nonverbal communication is really interesting, because a lot of nonverbal communication will be unavailable. This biochemical communication, not a thing, not over the internet. Right? But there's a lot of studies on the impact of that. But even facial communication is in question. So for me, the things you can control, right, are really about words and language, right, and language is such an important aspect of culture, and the deliberate design and spread of language is really important. We're tracking back the discussion we started on with images. The whole idea behind images is attaching language to a device to spread it, right? That's what it's actually all about. It's about memetics, and it's about how you actually can get ideas to spread at scale in big organizations. And so our challenge, I think the challenge for CEOs is being explicit about norms, because most norms are not explicit, they just happen, and you got to and it's really hard to understand what your norms are when you're swimming in the water, right? So that's the water of the norms. So you got to understand, what are your norms? What norms do you want to shift, right? What's the explicit language that you want to connect people to, right? And then how are you going to spread it? And that's a very short recipe for a very complex outcome, but it's really, how are you going to spread the language that you want people to adopt and you want them to understand, and which all tracks back to the original statement about us wanting to be part of something larger, doing meaningful work, etc. So there's a design to it, and then there's the execution. The execution can be done virtually. It's not a problem at all, but you just need the tools to do it. And so there you go.
Terrific. Ray, you're on mute.
Real quick, what do we do post-pandemic with CEOs going forward? What should they think about? There's one thing they should just think about as they're trying to get through this, help people become more inspired and understand where they're coming from, especially when people are acting on fear, not logic.
Well, okay, so that's a really interesting challenge. And I don't want to say we have the answers, but I think it's remembering that that notion that people want to be part of something larger, that they feel they're making a difference. Making sure, a lot of people dismiss things like vision as unimportant or just a marketing thing. It's not at all, right? It is what sets the actual culture, right? So your cultural norms, right? And we're not big on values, but I'll use the word just because everybody understands it. But your values are really a slave to delivering your vision, And if you're not really clear on where you're going, right, and it shouldn't be just about numbers. It should be about some metrics, but it should be a bigger picture, and it shouldn't be too fluffy. It needs to be pretty straightforward. But what you have to do is make sure everybody understands where you're going together, right, and understand how you're going to get there, right. And the how is what we call belief system, and you got to be really explicit about what the language around it and how you execute that. But if you can do that, right, then you will make people feel connected and involved and understanding that, look, we're in extraordinary times. It's temporary though, and we will get back to normal. And in the meantime, you're cared for, you're part of our community, and off we go together. So.
Thank you, Jason. That's
we
sage
are
advice.
here with Jason Korman, CEO at Gapingvoid. No Twitter handle on his own yet. He's trying to avoid getting in trouble, but you can follow the company Twitter handle at Gapingvoid. Definitely awesome, insightful. Thank you for sharing with that. And of course,
thanks, Jason.
Thanks,
Vala.
Love to have you back.
Terrific. It's incredible advice there. CEOs have, challenges that we're all facing. We're all struggling. You're not alone. So, and our final guest, and this is, the cleanup hitter spot where we often have our guests hit a grand slam, and this is no exception. We have Dr. David Bray, who's Director of Geotech Center and Geotech Commission at the Atlantic Council. Dr. Bray has served in a variety of leadership roles in turbulent environments, so this is incredibly important for him to share his advice to him, including bioterrorism preparedness response from 2002 to 2005, time on the ground in Afghanistan, serving as a nonpartisan executive director for the National Commission R&D and providing leadership in various agencies as an executive director. Last year, Dr. Bray accepted a leadership role to incubate a new global center at the Atlantic Council. He was named senior fellow with the Institute of Human Machine Cognition. He's a Business Insider named him one of the top 24 Americans who are changing the world. And he was also World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. Sorry, Dr. Bray, I have to reduce your bio because we only have 20 minutes. He has received multiple.
I'm going to say, we just found this guy off the street. We don't know where he came from, but we're glad to have him here. So.
We heard he's good, though. We heard he's good. So
he has received multiple global CIO awards. And last year, he was invited to give the AI World Society Distinguished Lecture to the United Nations. You can follow all the work that he's doing at the Geotech Center and Geotech Commission, following Twitter handle ATGEO Tech, TECH. Welcome back, Dr. Bray. I think you co-hosted the show multiple times, and I believe this may be your 7th appearance. So you're a first ballot Hall of Fame inductee to DisrupTV.
He's a freaking regular.
I'm just glad to have Vala here too, because sometimes it's like Ray and I, and we're like, "Where's Vala?" So asking for Vala, he's here now.
We are not asking for Vala, but because he is here. We actually found him at the local Japanese bento place, which was open.
Exactly.
And, we thought we'd get started.
Now I got to go to another hideout.
No. Hey, no, you're the perfect person. Public health degree, a little bit military experience, a little like foreign relations experience, and now you're at the Atlantic Council. Talk a little bit about that real quickly, because I think that's important for people to understand what you're doing on the Geotech Center. And then let's talk a little bit about what you've been seeing at the broader scale on what's been happening with COVID-19.
Sure. Thank you, Ray. And yes, late 2019, the Atlantic Council, which has been around since 1961, the Atlantic Council exists to champion the values of freedom, openness, and choice. We were created in 1961 when, believe it or not, the Democrats from the Truman administration and the Republicans from the Eisenhower administration were so busy fighting amongst themselves, they weren't focused on this thing called the Cold War and making sure we still had openness and free societies. Fast forward 59 years later, we might be back there again. But what the Atlantic Council asked me to do in late 2019 was to create a new center focusing on the geopolitics of new technologies and data. That's what the geotech is. It's not geospatial. I know IT, I didn't get to pick the name. I said, most people in IT are going to think geotech's geospatial. We're really focusing on how do we actually do the values that uplift people, prosperity, and peace around the world using new technologies and data. Because a lot of people talk about tech for good or AI for good, But I'm pretty sure if you go to every country around the world, including, say, China or Russia or other countries, they're probably sure they're doing tech for good as well. So it's really like, what are the values we want to be carrying forward, whether we're in the public sector, whether we're a member of the public, whether in the private sector, that embody what we're trying to do for good. And so that's what the Geotech Center is focused on. And we launched literally probably actually the same day the pandemic was officially declared in the United States. We actually launched. And what we have been focusing on since is connecting the private sector of the United States with world leaders, not just in the US, but around the world, on 3 specific activities. First, it's on this idea of data trust. We know there are certain countries that, sort of just say to their citizens, privacy, throw it out the window, all your data belongs to us. It might be a country, say, of 1.4 billion people where all their data is informing AI and algorithms. That's clearly not what we want to do here in the United States. That's not what we want to do in Europe or Canada. And so we've been having experts from Europe, from the United States and Canada, talk about how we could do data trust. Imagine, you've heard about what Google and Apple's doing, but the new data that just came out says that 3 out of 5 people still don't trust what they're doing when it comes to contact tracing. So what if instead they went to a nonprofit or multiple nonprofits? It could be a federation of nonprofits that were very transparent about why the data is being brought together. They have audit mechanisms, so you can actually have assurance that it's being done appropriately. They also have a sunset period. They say after a certain point in time, the data is forgotten. And then what this nonprofit this data trust is doing is it's making sure your personal data is protected, your proprietary data is protected if you're a private institution, and it's making sure that it's only being used for that purpose, and then afterwards it goes away. So that's one thing we're championing, and we think that's going to be important, not just with the immediate response for COVID-19, but the long-term economic recovery. The second thing we're also championing is, unfortunately, our analyses, and we did this in late March before the UN, but now the UN's also saying it too with the World Food Program. It's looking like, unfortunately, there's going to be regional food crises and possibly a global food crisis that's actually worse than actually COVID-19. And so we're trying to galvanize industry, not just in the United States, but around the world, to try and figure out what they can do with the food distribution. There's obviously cases where food, unfortunately, is being destroyed because it can't actually get to the market it needs to. And then there's other cases where people need it. And then there's also this question of, how do you keep the trains running? How do you keep the ports running? And then the last thing I'll say real quick, and happy to dive deeper into this, back in 2013, I made a proposal to DARPA, which was we could use data and AI, we could use biosensors, we could use genome sequencing technologies, and we could actually create an immune system for the planet. And what do I mean by that? I mean, we could have early warning networks that would tell us if a new pathogen's out there, and we could immediately start trying to characterize it, try to figure out what therapies work on it, and not have to wait a prolonged period of time before we start responding. And the reason why that was important was when I was involved in response to severe acute respiratory syndrome in 2003, we knew about it about 5.5, 6 months before China finally said something's going on. Wow. And fast forward, here we are now. We need to build an immune system for the planet, not just because there may be future pandemics or things like that, but also because all the data is showing, unfortunately, there may be second or if not third waves of COVID-19, and we need to have a better handle of that for the years going forward.
And also the age of bioweapons. I mean, we're worried about that. Biowarfare is coming upon us.
Yes, the good news is personalized medicine's coming. The bad news is personalized medicine's coming, and that can be tailored into poison. I don't think that we have national security or law enforcement apparatuses anywhere in the world right now that can handle that. And if right now you look like the solution is basically you monitor everybody, well, again, that's back to surveillance state. That's not what we want. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to figure out a way to do it that still gives you freedom and choice and autonomy, but also make sure that the technology doesn't become surveillance.
Sure. Dr. Bray, the founder of my company, believes business is the greatest platform for change. We've had in 4 weeks over 30 million unemployed in the US. What can the private sector do to help respond and rebuild, now and of course, post-pandemic in this new norm that we're talking about?
So, great question, and I actually, your timing is very apt, Vala. I want to give thanks actually to the CEO of your company because he actually helped when we were trying to adopt. And just a real quick note that child who we did succeed to adopt just celebrated his third birthday. So he actually embodies those values, and want to thank him for that.
No, congratulations.
That's so awesome. That's awesome.
So yes,
share with our people the name of your son and
yes, Dylan. Dylan, he is happy. I will also share that he knew, he was telling everyone in the neighborhood that his birthday was was coming up and everything like that. And that day when I went to go actually to wake him up, I said, do you know what today day is? He's like, my birthday? And I said, yes. And then he said, where's my cake?
Oh, awesome.
Trained well.
So,
Apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Go ahead.
I suppose not. But I raise that because you're absolutely right. We're now living in this era in which things that used to be done by government can't. They have to be done by industry, but the trouble is industry doesn't really know how to mobilize coalitions. Individual companies can do things, but we really need to build larger coalitions that span nations and sectors. And so right now, with all that we're talking about, the Pandemic Prevention Board, that really should be led by industry, not by government, because they've got the data and AI, they've got the possibilities to ask for technology, and they recognize that if you destabilize marketplaces because of a pandemic, that impacts your bottom line. And so that's how you have to make the case. Same thing with food, that they have the ability to actually do better logistics, better supply chains, digitization. And let's face the reality too. When we talk about a recovery, the recovery is going to be back faster for those companies that in fact are inherently digital versus nations which have lagged on going digital. I mean, unless you're Estonia, it's going to be a very long period of time. And so we're in this interesting period where maybe instead of the United Nations, we should be talking about United Companies for Good or something like that. And again, define what we mean for good. But would love to, and again, any industry that wants to tackle this on, what I love about what the last two speakers have talked about is too, they're hitting the nail on the head. I don't think we're going to go back to normal, to be honest. I think COVID-19 is one of those seismic shifts where we will date the world as being different from here on out. And what it's going to include is two important issues that your past two speakers talked about, which is how do we create trust remotely, and how do we create culture remotely? Because up until now, we humans would get together in person. That's how we would figure out through body language and things like that, through nonverbal cues. That will hopefully, maybe we'll get back to, in another, I don't think it's going to be as fast as people think. And even then, I think if there is a second wave to COVID-19, we may be back to doing this again during the winter and coming back out next summer or spring. But I raise that because up until now, the way that we've done governance, and I'm intentionally using the word governance, not governments, is it was in person. I mean, face it, Congress hadn't even given themselves authorizations to work remotely when the pandemic hit. And then what do you do about classified information? You really don't want people reading classified information in their house unless they've got the appropriate protections. And so we've got a challenge of how do we create culture and trust remotely? And then on top of that, how do we respond with the appropriate speed and nimbleness to not just this pandemic, but other challenges such as climate change or other issues on the horizon, which again, I think we have definitely demonstrated that our current institutions are woefully unprepared to deal with that. But everything that we've been talking about here in terms of emotion and narrative, the challenge that we face is that unless you're an autocracy, it's very messy to try and figure out what's truth online without meeting in person. It's very messy to try and figure out what way is the right way to go because there's a lot of emotions, and let's face it, a lot of what's currently on the internet, whether it's media or whether it's, different perspectives or things like that, tend to be very emotional heavy. Fact may be lesser, may or may not be there, but we've got to figure out how do we build trust, how do we build culture online, especially when our confirmation biases might preclude us from wanting to read or dive deeper into something that we should be diving into, but our confirmation biases are holding us back.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's what you said, this incredible seismic shift in the 21st century where perhaps in the future, when we talk about AC, BC, we're talking about, before COVID, after COVID.
100%.
And that's just incredibly profound. Ray.
Yeah, no, we're definitely seeing that. And part of that conversation that you've probably been having is really this discussion of, new international relationships that are forming, right? We're seeing the divestiture and the diversification of supply chains out of China. And people are trying to move them out. Japan offered billions of dollars to manufacturers to move out. I believe we have legislation on the table that's coming up in the next 4 to 6 weeks in the same way for medical supplies and other parts of the industries. Can we become more cooperative as we're closing borders and as we're thinking about, the shifts in where nationalism has now come back into vogue, and parties have almost like swapped places. Like, you get one party giving out free checks to everyone, you get the other party closing down borders, and you're like, wait, what happened? They're like 8 weeks ago, this would never have happened this way, right? I mean, are norms changing as well along that, or what are we operating against, to get to this point?
Are we talking about end of globalization post,
well, so I think
AC?
Right. We actually had we wrote a piece, and it was actually it was the same day, but it was about 5 or 6 hours before Governor Newsom announced that California was going to be operating like a nation state. So we were a little bit ahead of the curve there. But we actually raised the question, which is what pandemic may replace the current notion of a nation state being defined solely by geography. But what takes its place? It could be increased globalism, where people say, let's find, that we got into this mess because nations didn't work together. Let's find a way to work together. And I would say the path of globalism is not nations coming together, but industry saying, look, if we don't figure this out for the world as a whole, we're going to lose marketplaces as a whole. And so globalism might be a path that's followed more in the future of industry, but industry's got to figure it out how it can pursue its own self-interest, but also include whether it's citizen boards, citizen juries, some way of involving the public to do things beyond the self-interest of just the company alone.
Right.
Because otherwise, I get why companies have to make sure they show return on investments and serve their stakeholders, but if they need to do something larger than that, they've got to figure out what that looks like. That may be one thing, but I would say also watch what happens in Europe. Does Europe manage to keep the EU together with the response to COVID-19? We already saw, unfortunately, Italy got left to itself, which is not a good sign. And then even within Italy itself is bankrupt. And so the question is, will the country fall apart?
They're divided by Belt and Road coming through.
Yeah.
Well, there's that. I mean, I think the interesting thing with the Belt and Road Initiative is the concern there is that actually that might very well be China simply just trying to currency exodus. It just printed so much money that it's wanting to just get it out of the country. And sure, it's sort of like how Japan, Japan bought the Rockefeller Center for $3 billion, even though it was only valued at $1.5 billion. And then after their currency collapsed, they sold it for $1.5 billion and they were happy. And so I raise that because that may be what's going on here is that we assign motives that may not be there when it's just really just economics and currency leaving. But, these are all things that and I think the challenge is it doesn't do this. Go ahead. Oh, yes.
Yeah, I know you're a historian, so you can validate this, but I don't believe there's ever been a time where the entire globe, 200 countries working to solve one problem. And so you would think there would be a spirit of collaboration and togetherness, given the fact that this has never happened in the history of mankind. But my question is that was maybe more of an observation. And I asked this of Jason, and I would have asked that with Rana, but we ran out of time. Advice to CEOs. What do they need to do now so that their companies, their stakeholders can be relevant in this new norm? And the bar is much higher. Like you said, the companies that are digital immigrants that ignored their playbook now need to rush to Constellation post-pandemic playbook and execute with sense of urgency. But what advice do you have? And I know you speak to CEOs all the time. So, and I suspect now you're in listening mode, empathy, trying to be useful and helpful. But now put your boardroom hat on and give advice.
Sure. So the first thing I would say to CEOs is, yes, you're absolutely right. This is unprecedented time. There is no textbook for this. And what I think CEOs need to do is find a way to create peer support networks. There is a group called the Young Presidents Organization. It's 29,000 CEOs around the world, 130 of them. If you're a CEO, join that because that will help you at least begin to share notions with your peers and be able to focus on things that help you improve your company, but also then think more globally as well. The second thing I would say to CEOs is if you expect someone else is going to fix this, that's not going to happen. We are the cavalry. And so find like-minded people that are passionate about making it happen. I know that both you, Vala, and Ray, you are. I know I am as well. And so we probably need to ping people together. And you raised the question, Vala, of why aren't countries coming together on this? And I think there's two reasons. One, the incentives are wrong. That there are no incentives for people to think globally if they're locally elected or nationally elected. Their only incentives are to play to their electorate or their local governments. And that's why we need to figure out what's a different model that involves industry. But the second reason is there's always been misinformation or disinformation around any crisis. When I was involved in response to 9/11, there was immediately conspiracy theories as to what 9/11 was about. Then when we responded to the anthrax events and later severe acute respiratory syndrome, with SARS, there was misinformation that somehow the US had created the virus. So there's always been misinformation or disinformation. But what's happened now is a large majority, especially in the developed world, have smartphones. And these smartphones, while they give us great benefits, also tie into our emotions. They tie into our narratives. Everything we just talked about that's being used for good to shape culture can also be weaponized. And this is probably the worst infodemic I have ever seen, in which there's a whole lot of misinformation. And that's making world leaders very risk averse.
So the infodemic is almost as bad as the pandemic?
It's actually, I think it's hurting and possibly killing people because it's convincing world leaders to not take it's almost encouraging people to take zero risk.
Yes.
And you have to take some informed risk in the midst of this. And you may be wrong, and you tell the public, this is my first attempt at iterative learning. Fail is first attempt at iterative learning, and you do it over and over again as opposed to just waiting on the sidelines, because you're never going to have perfect information, but you got to do something. Yeah. And that's why people aren't coming together. And that's why I think we've got to figure out, how do we do this new model? Because industry in some respects has better data and better insights as to what's happening. But they also don't want to give up proprietary secrets. And that's where maybe data trust, again, can be this trusted framework for food or for pandemics. But we've got to mobilize, because unfortunately, the people we have elected in different societies, and this is not meant to be U.S.-centric. This is just
everywhere.
Yeah.
We're in trouble.
They're not informed risk takers, and they're also not scientists usually.
No, and it's Western democracies, right? So
yeah. So I think we've got to figure out what CEOs can do to raise their voices and say, look, we've got to figure out this long-term economy, and we've got to make sure we build a stronger, more resilient world going forward. Because this is not the only crisis that's going to be possible in the next decade.
Now, we don't want to have to wait till CCE to pick this up, right, in October. I'm sure you're doing a whole bunch of other activities. I've got to cut you short. We are almost out of time. But you can follow Dr. David Bray, Director of the Geotech Center and Geotech Commission at Atlantic Council, and follow him on Twitter. You're going to see some very insightful research at AC Geotech, and he's been on our show 8 times, both as a guest and as host and a guest host. So, hey, thanks a lot for being on the show, and we'll catch up over the weekend as well. So,
thank you, Ray. Thank you, Vala.
I owe you a call.
Thank you, sir.
Take care.
I don't know anyone that's committed towards betterment of society than Dr. Bray. I've known him for years. And he has this unquenchable thirst to do good. He's a connector, a generous connector. I've met extraordinary people as a result of his personal commitment to connect like-minded individual. And he's a force to be reckoned with. He's everything that he does is purpose-driven, and it's always for betterment of others. So exceptional human being. Forget about how smart he is and all the awards and degrees. My goodness, his bio is second to none. He's just a good guy. So anyway, speaking of good guys, we've got more good, amazing guests coming. Next week is episode 189. We're approaching 600 unique guests. It's going to happen in the next few weeks, months. So we're excited about that milestone. We have Julia Bards-Messer, SVP Head of Data Architecture, Salesforce Development at Voya Financial. We have William Davido, author of The Autonomous Revolution. Constellation has talked about the autonomous enterprise. I've written quite a bit about the tech stack in the autonomous vehicle and how it will ultimately represent the autonomous enterprise. So I'm really interested in this topic. And Heather Willems, who many of us who've been to Constellation Connect Enterprise know that there are brilliant ways of capturing the essence of a conversation and a thesis. And so Heather's the founder, visual strategist, and graphic facilitator. And you'll see examples of her work live next week while our other guests are speaking. Hopefully we'll be able to get Heather to capture some of their wisdom. And as you know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So this is great. Ray, closing remarks on what has been, incredible few months. I'm happy it's May. I'm happy to exit April. That's for sure.
No, I definitely agree with you on that. We're definitely in some very interesting scenarios going forward, and I think we have to make a lot of decisions. And one of the things that I've been trying to help is on Twitter. You've noticed I've taken some provocative views intentionally to get people to have conversations they normally wouldn't have. And really, one of the things I really wish people would understand is, like, you can believe in things that seem mutually dichotomous in some cases, but we can reopen the economy and protect those at risk. We can think about economic health and public health. We can think about common sense and data-driven approaches. And I really hope that over the next 3 to 4 weeks, we work together, we come together to improve that, and we think about how we can work with each other to be successful. Because right now, more than ever, we need everybody to come together, not to just go off into their own little tribes and complain. And the challenge is no trust in media institutions, right? We don't trust our political institutions. We have very little trust in terms of just we're in the middle of an election year here too, and in other countries. And so I really hope we do pull together. And I think that's an important piece. And that's one of the things I'm going to keep committing to.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you may say, provocative and bold, but your level of accuracy in the content that you share, knowing, and I've worked with you for years, that it's evidence-based, it's data-based, you triangulate and you connect with some of the best and brightest people around the world, and of course your background gives you the conviction and the moral authority to share what you believe to be the grounded truth. And at the same time, I witness, when you see data that potentially opposes your views, you're flexible enough to potentially change your mind or continue to have dialogue, because knowing there's a trust deficit, empathy deficit, forgiveness deficit, we now need to really stretch ourselves and look for goodness in people and ideas in order to really make progress. There's really no other way. So I applaud you for how active you are trying to share what you believe to be grounded truth. It's certainly spirited conversations, and I like seeing it.
I'm taking my hits. I'm totally taking my hits. I totally understand. But it's the scientific method. You try different ideas, you bring different ideas, you get folks together, and
Right.
and hopefully we all learn from each other. And so that's part of it. And I see definitely, your company is definitely ahead of that and doing that. So, but yeah.
I subscribe to Jeff Bezos. When Jeff Bezos was asked, who are the smartest people you work with, he said people that can change their mind. So,
all right, we got to go. Getting notes from the producer. We're way over. Hey, everybody, have a great show. See you next week. If it's Friday, it's DisrupTV. See you guys. Bye. See you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.